Welcome to the Bioethics Babe podcast, where we examine the tough questions in human flourishing in light of science, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Irina Grosso-Agnew. Now let's dive in. What if everything you've heard about the abortion pill isn't the full story? OB-GYN Dr. Donna Harrison joins Bioethics Babe to pull back the curtain on chemical abortion, from how the pills actually work, to the hidden complications women face, to the behind-the-scenes schemes at the upper echelons of power that took place to get the abortion pill to America. Did you know that the Population Council created a Cayman Islands shell company called Danco in order to get Mifepristone to the U.S.? Did you know that taxpayer dollars helped develop RU-486 with the help of the U.S. National Institute of Child Health and Human Services? Did you also know that Planned Parenthood helped test and distribute the drug, or that the FDA quietly loosened safeguards putting women's health at risk, or why so many adverse events go unreported? Dr. Harrison exposes how women have been left to manage abortions alone, and what true woman-centered care should look like. This episode exposes the loopholes, the misinformation, and the lives at stake, and challenges listeners to rethink what quote-unquote safe and legal really means when it comes to the abortion pill. It's eye-opening, it's bold, and it's a story everybody deserves to hear. Before we begin, a quick note. Today's episode includes medical and personal discussions about abortion and pregnancy loss that may be difficult for some listeners. Please use discretion and take care while listening. Today on the show, we're joined by Dr. Donna Harrison, a retired board-certified obstetrician gynecologist and director of research for the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, also known as AAPLOG, the largest pro-life physician organization in the world. Under her leadership, AAPLOG has championed evidence-based medicine that protects both women and their unborn children. Dr. Harrison has lectured internationally on chemical abortion, maternal health, and emergency contraception, and the short and long-term complications following abortion. She has testified before the FDA and U.S. Congress, published peer-reviewed research on chemical abortion and emergency contraception, and presented at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women on topics including chemical abortion in developing nations and maternal mortality. Today, we'll dig deep, exploring the science behind chemical abortion pills, their risks, regulatory changes, and what true woman-centered care really means. Let's welcome Dr. Donna Harrison.
Thank you so much, Irina.
So before we get started on chemical abortion, risks, etc., I'd love to hear more, Dr. Harrison, about your story. What first inspired you to study biology and medicine and eventually become a board-certified OB-GYN?
Well, that's a long story, but I was very interested in science as a kid, and I found the science of life particularly fascinating. But I was a feminist, and I, pro-abortion, the whole bit, until I got to college. And in college, when I took my first course in biology and we studied embryology, it was glaringly apparent that a mammal starts at sperm egg fusion, period. And we're mammals, guys. So it was very apparent to me that a human being thus starts at sperm egg fusion. And so when we do an abortion, we're actually killing a human being in the womb. That was really apparent to me. And I was still a feminist, but I switched from being pro-abortion to pro-life. And that has kind of made all the difference. When I got through college, I met my husband. We were both interested in medicine. So we got married, and 2 weeks later we were in med school together. And in that course, in the process of trying to figure out what do I want to do when I grow up as a doctor, I was really drawn to obstetrics and gynecology because I think women are cool, being one of them. And I think that it was just a way to actually serve my sisters and to be part of this incredible beginning of life and to foster that. So as I did that and I had lectures in obstetrics and gynecology, I realized that some of the abortionists who were lecturing were flat out lying because I majored in biochemistry and chemistry. I knew my biology backward and forward. And they were saying that, oh, well, there's nothing there but a blob of tissue until birth. I'm like, you're out of your mind. Is another human being there from sperm egg fusion, fertilization onward. And so then, the part of me that doesn't like people that lie got my back up and I said, I'm gonna move the needle on this. This is just not right that people are not understand or being told something that just flat out is not true. And that got me involved in pro-life issues and that kind of took it from there. I finished obstetrics and gynecology, practiced for 10 years, and during that time became involved with the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, and then decided that I really wanted to see American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, that is AAPLOG, grow. And I had an idea of how to do it. And so I became the executive director in 2013 and, resigned as executive director after the Dobbs decision, which I was very happy about. And AAPLOG played a role, not everything, but played a role in providing evidence-based arguments about why abortion is really bad for women, because it really is. And that was part of people starting to understand that Roe versus Wade is not about some theoretical right of one person over another. It's about reality. It's about killing human beings in the womb, and it's about hurting the women who you are aborting. So then after I resigned as the CEO, then I continued on as director of research because that's my passion. And that's where we are.
Well, I'm glad you brought up a little bit about the history of APLOG, but how did APLOG even begin, even before
Oh,
you ran it? And what was its mission and history and vision?
it's a fascinating story. And in fact, at some point, you should dig into the history even more on our website, which is AAPLOG.org. But the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology was pro-life until about the 1960s. And the reason they were pro-life is that obstetricians, gynecologists had historically recognized that they have two patients. That was what was unique about obstetrics and gynecology. And all of our textbooks said so. And then in the 60s, there was a bare majority of people who wanted to see, bare majority of people in the APLOG leadership or ACOG leadership who wanted to see abortion legalized. And they basically instituted a top-down position that ACOG was going to be pro-abortion. And in 1972, they submitted a brief in the Roe versus Wade case, arguing for abortion. But there was still a minority of pro-life people inside ACOG leadership. And they said, we see exactly where this is going. So in 1973, they separately incorporated as the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. Now, APLOG remained as a special interest group within ACOG until 2013 when I took over as CEO of APLOG. And it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the fact that ACOG was taking a hard turn pro-abortion. They were going to come out and actively lobby for abortion. And they decided that they couldn't get rid of AAPLOG as long as we were a special interest group. So they just got rid of the title of special interest group altogether,
Wow.
which was a huge blessing for us because we went from 1,500 members to almost instantly 3,000 members
Mhm.
because so many OB-GYNs are sick and tired of ACOG's rabid pro-abortion activism. They joined us immediately, and now we're up to 8,000. So there are a lot of OB-GYNs who are very disgruntled. ACOG pretends that they represent OB-GYNs across the country, and on some things they do. On abortion, they do not. There have been 3 studies, actually, from 2011 till I think the most recent was 2019, looking at how many OB-GYNs actually do abortions in this country. And it turns out that between 75 and 93% of OB-GYNs do not do
Wow.
abortions. And that's not because we can't empty a uterus. We can empty a uterus at any gestational age. That's what residency is all about. What it is that OB-GYNs recognize, as they have historically recognized, we have two patients. Why would we kill one of them? So I think that it's a phenomenal time, because as ACOG turns more and more pro-abortion, more and more people are looking for an alternative, and American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, we're the alternative.
Wow. So I want to ask a question that you said something to the effect of this is what medical residency is about. Do you mean by that now, and we're getting into other territory about the fact that some medical residency programs push for training for abortion, even if you don't want it, and they started an opt out instead of an opt in, right? Maybe you can
Right.
talk a little bit about that and how residents and med students are forced into learning how to do abortions even if they don't want to. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Since we're a deep dive, I'll give you the deep dive history. It was in 94, 95 that ACOG and started to push for mandatory training in abortion for OB-GYN residents. AAPLOG, American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, screamed. We had a big fight in Congress, and the result of that were conscience protections, the ones that you've heard of, Coates-Snow, Weldon amendments. These protections said, okay, if you residency program require OB-GYNs to perform abortion, you are violating federal law and will remove your federal funding. So what happened? The compromise position was that the organization that certifies all OB-GYN residency programs, said, okay, you don't have to require residents, but you have to offer abortion training in all OB-GYN residency programs. That's called the opt-in, which means that an OB-GYN resident up until 2019 could say, I want to train in abortion, and then they could have a rotation in abortion. But you didn't have to. That all changed in 2019. Two things happened. The requirements for residency programs were changed. So for a residency program to be accredited by ACGME, which is the organization that accredits residency programs, for an OB-GYN residency program to be accredited, they were going to have to make abortion training a mainstreamed part of OB-GYN residency, which means that a resident could say to all the people that control whether or not they graduate, they could say, I'm not going to do it. And then they're targeted from that moment on when
Right.
they refuse. That's called you can opt out. So what changed, you were right. When it was opt-in, residents were a little bit pressured, but not much pressured. When it's opt-out means this is basic part of OB-GYN training, and you can refuse it, but you got a target on your back, sweetheart, the moment you refuse it. So what it's done is it's kept people from going into OB-GYN. So that happened in 2019. And another thing happened in 2019, the same time, they're intimately connected. And that is the ACGME and American Board of Medical Specialties approved, the board certifying body, ABOG, approved an ABOG application for a new fellowship. That new fellowship, a new specialty, was called complex family planning. Complex family planning is a specialty in late-term abortions. It's a specialty in people who want to specialize in killing human beings in the womb after the point where they could survive outside the womb. It's incredibly gruesome. And yet, by approving that specialty, what they did was then require every OB-GYN training program to have a faculty in that specialty. It was a way of pressuring not only the residents, but pressuring the training programs into mainstreaming abortion. And that is hotly debated right now because, especially in states where abortion is illegal, what you're doing is you're forcing residency programs to provide abortion training use state funds to train their residents in a procedure that's illegal. Now, this can't stand. So we are just hoping that some residency programs have the guts to stand up and say, wait a minute, I'm in Texas. You cannot force me to use Texas funds to send my residents someplace to train in a procedure that's illegal in Texas. It's
Well,
going to come to a head.
can states push back on that? And have they in terms of the medical residency programs in their and med schools in their state? If abortion is illegal, how could state funds go towards that? Have they pushed back at all?
Outstanding question. I am hoping that some residency programs will have the courage to push back. But remember, the residency programs are accredited by ACGME. If they push back, they can lose their accreditation. If they lose their accreditation, nobody comes, because in order to be board certified, you have to graduate from an ACGME accredited program. So it's a matter of this private organization, this accrediting body, having incredible power over the training of OB-GYNs and forcing them to do procedures that are not only illegal but unconscionable.
It's really mind-boggling how this could even happen, and just for the sake of our listeners, by having an opt-out, it means everyone has to train for abortion if you're in a residency program as an training to become an OB-GYN. And that, as Dr. Harrison said, means that you would have to potentially go before the board of your school and say, "I'm pro-life. I don't believe in doing abortions. I will never do abortions in my life. I don't want to train for them." But imagine the kind of target that would be on your back and your chances of getting a job outside of this. You're labeled, "Oh, well, she's pro-life or he's pro-life." And that makes it more difficult, which puts a lot of pressure on these students because they feel that tug. Do I follow my conscience, or do I just go along with the training and then just not do the abortions? But that obviously that shouldn't be the case. That students are put in the position between protecting their conscience and getting a job out of med school and out of residency, and so that's unfortunate. So you said that obviously these private organizations have so much power. We were talking with Dr. Jill Simons from the American College of Pediatricians, and they have a similar history that they broke off from the American Academy of Pediatrics for the same reason, because the AAP was pushing for abortion as well. So with these, whether it's with these medical organizations that have ideological bends that then push that on their membership, or from the certifying organizations, how do they get so much power, and how can they push that? And as you were saying, most physicians, whether they're OB-GYNs or pediatricians, are not for abortion. But then these medical organizations, their leadership may be for abortion and other, the transgender surgeries, etc. So how can they push their ideology on a whole membership that doesn't believe in that? And also these certifying organizations, how can they have so much power over med schools and residency programs?
It's an outstanding question, which I'm just starting to untie that knot. But what happens is certification was supposed to be a proxy for competence. Okay. If you're certified, that means somebody's looked you over and they say, yeah, you're doing good work. All right. It's not supposed to be, yeah, you're of the right political opinion, or you're of the right opinion when it comes to abortion. That was not ever supposed to be part of the certifying process. States don't have the time to examine every physician that wants to practice in their state. So they use certification as a proxy for competence. Hospitals don't have time to vet every physician and watch them operate. So they use certification as a proxy for competence. So what you have is the hospital systems, the states, they're all relying on this unelected, unaccountable accrediting organization. And this is problematic. I mean, right now you can't touch that organization. They aren't subject to like anti-discrimination laws because they're private. They're not government. So it's a huge problem, and I'd love to have some really smart legal policy people crack that nut, but I'm still trying to figure out how in the world we got here and what can be done to take away that kind of power from a certifying body that is abusing its power and now using it for political gain.
What about actually having a pro-life certifying body, one that follows a Hippocratic oath? We in other
Yeah.
areas of the industries, we've switched from pro-abortion companies to pro-life companies, whether it's the diaper companies or et cetera. Why can't we come up with a new certifying body, and then there will be options for which certifying body, and then that way people aren't med students and residency students aren't subject to those types of requirements that put their rights of conscience at risk.
It's a great idea. It has begun for those doctors who have already gone through and been initially board certified by these bodies. Then you have an option once you're initially board certified. You've graduated from a ACGME certified residency program. So if you pass that hurdle, you don't have to continue with a BOG certification. There's another certifying body called National Board, NBPAS, National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. And NBPAS, it's not pro-life, it's not pro-abortion, it's just an honest certifying body. And you
Neutral
can
on the political issues.
it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is certify incompetence. Okay. And that's what, that's what's supposed to happen. So I would recommend that anyone who has already passed those first two hurdles consider NBPAS certification, National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. But you still have the problem that there is no competition for certifying bodies for residency programs or for medical schools. And remember, the pro-abortion industry has gazillionaires behind it. The pro-life industry is really the grassroots. And so, if there are any gazillionaires out there listening that would love to crack this nut, please contact us, contact Arena or contact me, because we actually are working in the space to try to solve this accreditation problem. It's a huge problem.
Well, thank you for sharing some of that background. It's very important for people to know what's actually happening behind the scenes, especially as students and residents are trying to train just to do good healing work, and they have to jump through all these hurdles and hoops and have the courage even during med programs and residency programs to stand up for their beliefs. I want to go back a little bit to your like, as with your position as executive director of AAPLOG. What were some of the biggest accomplishments during that time, and then what led you to transition from the executive role to the research role?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. I'm 65 and I'm of the age where I think the next gen should be the one stepping up in leadership. And Christina Francis, who is the current CEO, is outstanding. She's an outstanding speaker. She's in practice. She's up on her science. She's the ideal leader for APLOG. And that is really clearly apparent. I'm 100% pro Christina. And she was clearly the one that should be leading APLOG at this point in time. And, so that's your last question. The first question is, during my time as executive director of APLOG, um, I I am glad, I'm really glad that APLOG could play a part in bringing forward the effects of abortion on women, because I think it was something that was really suppressed and not talked about. And by polarizing the abortion issue into, well, we're pro-women and we're pro-child, it's a complete misnomer. The people that care about other human beings are the people that care about both the mom and the child. And the people that are simply looking for population reduction, they're the ones that are forcing this on women. They don't care how many women die. I mean, this is evidenced by the fact that maternal mortality in the United States is worse than any other developed country. And it was going down until 2000. Very, very interesting that in 2000, what we had was the approval of the abortion drug Mifepristone. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, don't mishear me. Not saying that all the maternal mortality is due to this abortion drug, but I'm saying it's very, very interesting that the maternal mortality in the United States was decreasing until 2000 and has since increased until we are the worst in the developed world. Why is that? There have been a couple studies looking at, are more women dying who go all the way to birth? Okay. Turns out probably not. Live birth mortality is probably not changing. Well, okay, she's pregnant, she doesn't have a live birth, and now she's dead. What do you think happened?
Hmm.
This is the question that ACOG has fought us tooth and nail to be able to not answer. Okay, we have pushed for the last decade to say maternal mortality statistics need to be stratified, need to be broken out by what happened to the baby. So how many women died after giving birth? How many women died after an abortion? How many women died with a molar pregnancy or an ectopic pregnancy? This is not rocket science, guys. This is straightforward answering the question and solving the problem. But the pro-abortion people are terrified. They are terrified of looking at maternal mortality in that way. So they'll smush it all together and they'll say, nothing to see here, pull the curtain, when there's something big to see there. And so anyway, I'm happy that AAPLOG has been able to bring that discussion to the forefront while I was executive director, and continues even more to bring it to the forefront. The question of what's happening with women, what has abortion done to us as women, to our humanity, to our sense of understanding and love for the human being in our womb. I'm very glad that AAPLOG has been a big part of that.
As am I. And one of the myths is that pro-life people only care about the baby. That's not true. We're the ones who are wanting to protect women from harm, from the harms of abortion, and of course protect the baby as well. We
Yeah.
don't have to pit the two against each other. We're saying we're pro-woman, we're pro-child, we're pro-health and safety.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're about. Your discussion about how chemical abortion and maternal mortality uh, started going up in the US. We're not talking about a third
Yeah.
world country here. We're talking about a first world country where
Right.
we have maternal mortality that somehow started rising again in 2000. Could you explain a little bit for those who might not know? So, chemical abortion, what it is, what's the difference between chemical abortion and surgical abortion? And you're saying that chemical abortion has risen starting in 2000 in the US, correct?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So let me go back a little bit, talk about this wonderful design for human beings and how they start. So when a woman, uh, when a woman has embryo inside, okay, egg meets sperm, you got fertilization, you got a zygote, one-celled embryo, continues down her fallopian tube and then implants in her uterus. The reason that the embryo can continue down the fallopian tube and implant in a uterus is a hormone called progesterone. It's made by her ovary after the egg's released. Progesterone is a natural hormone, and it allows the woman's body to change to receive this embryo, to allow this embryo to implant in her womb and to continue to grow. So progesterone is needed all the way through the pregnancy. It's called progesterone because pro means for, gest is pregnancy, and erone is steroid hormone. So it's the for pregnancy steroid hormone. That hormone is critically important for maintaining the baby's growth, maintaining this communication between the mom. And it's critically important for the mom's body to change. There are progesterone receptors in her brain, her breast, her ovaries, her immune system, all over her body. A woman's body changes when she's pregnant. Some of that change is really good, by the way. It turns out that as she carries the baby past 20 weeks, her breast, the breast tissue that grows because pregnancy causes stimulation, the breast tissue that grows becomes cancer resistant as the hormones from the pregnancy cause the breast tissue to be able to make milk. Once breast tissue is capable of producing milk, it doesn't produce cancer.
Hmm.
So it's important that being pregnant and going through this process of changing is really super important for women's health. It's a good thing. Now, it's very clear that scientists knew how progesterone works. So the target for stopping a pregnancy was progesterone. So they made chemicals called antiprogesterones or selective progesterone receptor modulators, if you want to look up the details, but they are progesterone blockers. And there's two progesterone blockers that are on the market now for different things. One progesterone blocker is RU46, which is the same as Mifepristone, which is the same as Mifeprex. They're all the names for the same drug, RU46. And then there's a second generation RU46 called Ella. Ella, the chemical name is Olapristol, and Ella is FDA approved as a, quote, emergency contraceptive. Well, Ella is equally potent milligram for milligram with RU46. Yeah. So with Mifepristone. So there are two powerful antiprogesterone drugs now available on the market, FDA approved. And the purpose is to block that hormone from allowing a woman's body to let the baby continue to grow. When they block the hormone, baby starves. But even though the baby has starved and died, the Mifepristone, the Mifeprex, the progesterone blocking drug, doesn't cause the uterus very often to squeeze the baby out, even though it's dead. So a second drug is given a couple days later, and that's Cytotec. It's an ulcer drug, but it causes intense uterine contractions. And that Cytotec causes the woman's body to push out the baby. But it may not completely push out the baby in the placenta. And therein lies the problem, a major problem. So if you're early in pregnancy, when it was initially approved, the drug was used only up till 7 weeks of pregnancy. What does 7 weeks of pregnancy mean? Well, when a woman misses her period, that's the 4th week. So we're talking 3 weeks after she misses her period. That's 7 weeks of pregnancy. That's just how we historically have done it since obstetrics began. So if she's using a abortion drug at that time, maybe 1 out of 20 will end up in the emergency room or have some kind of a complication where they have to have surgery to remove the rest of the tissue. If she's a month and a half further along than that, and about 50% of women are a month and a half further along than what they think they are when they come into a doctor's office. That's why we do ultrasounds. If she's further along and she's 12 weeks, she has a 1 out of 3 chance of ending up with tissue left inside, sometimes with major hemorrhage, sometimes requiring emergency surgery. So how far along she is critically important to her knowing what her risks are. And in fact, it is impossible to give her accurate, informed consent. That is, tell her what her risks are if she does this. It's impossible to give her accurate, informed consent without an ultrasound to tell her how far along she is. There have been women who went in to, the abortion clinic and were told, oh, you're 6 or 7 weeks along, who have delivered a 22-week baby. Wow. Because nobody did an ultrasound and nobody cared to look. There are women who are ordering this drug online. They have no idea how far along they are. And they're delivering babies that are viable into the toilet to drown. It is unconscionable what is going on right now. It would be frank, write the check malpractice in any other setting except the abortion industry. So this is part of what AAPLOG wants to get across to women all across the country. Look, you're being duped. This is a dangerous drug. And it's a dangerous drug that has huge effects for you. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to how does this drug work, but hopefully that is the start of the conversation.
This is the reason we're having this episode, because chemical abortion is on the rise. And I really want the listeners to understand the risks involved with chemical abortion. And as Dr. Harrison just said, the later you are in pregnancy, the higher the risk that you will have complications. And we will talk about this, but the FDA moved from, what was it, 7 weeks until 70 days or
Yeah, it was 7 weeks to 70 days, which is 10 weeks.
10 weeks. And so they pushed it off, how far off you can actually take the chemical abortion drugs, which increases the risk for women. Also, I thank you for breaking down the word progesterone so people understand. And an easy way that I remember is progestation.
Yeah,
Progesterone helps gestate the baby. So
right.
any drug that has its purpose to block the progesterone means that the uterine lining is thinned out. The baby can't implant if fertilization has happened. And so the baby will die. And then then, as Dr. Harrison said, then you need another drug that will cause contractions. And so this is the two drug mix. You get what we call chemical abortion. And women are now given the drug to take on their own. And they take the first one, and then they have to take the second one. And then they are having contractions at home on the toilet by themselves. There's very little medical supervision. Now, you mentioned, Dr. Harrison, that there are no ultrasounds required, and the requirements around this drug have actually been lessened over time. And before we go into what those requirements were back in 2000 when it first came on the market in the US and where they are now, before we go into that, I wanted to give some statistics. So back in 2023, according to the Guttmacher Institute, which is the pro-abortion arm of Planned Parenthood that does the research, they said that chemical abortions accounted for 63% of all abortions in the US. So think about that. About two thirds of all abortions in the US are chemical abortions. In 2020, it was 53, so it was just a little over half. So in those 3 years, it jumped from a little over half to a little under two thirds. And you can see that shift is significant, and it continues to go in that direction. So abortions, instead of them um, being in an abortion facility, as terrible as that is, with the chemical abortion, there's even less medical supervision. Women are left to deal with the consequences of the abortion taking place all on their own. Could you talk a little bit, Dr. Harrison, about the changes that were made? You mentioned the requirements in 2020 that they were up to 7 weeks. I believe it required an ultrasound, right? Back then in 2020, or not even?
No.
Okay. So can you tell us what the FDA approved in 2020, in 2000, and then the changes that happened between 2000 and especially 2016 when there was the major update?
Okay. I'll talk about the most important differences, okay? So in 2000, a woman was supposed to come in to the abortionist's office for a in-person visit. She was supposed to be observed taking the Mifepristone. She was supposed to come back in 2 days to find out whether she even needed the second drug, because 1 out of 20 women, about 5%, will pass the baby completely in the placenta with just Mifepristone. But, you know, 80% or 95% will need an additional drug to cause the completion of the abortion. The drug was limited to 7 weeks, which I said is 3 weeks after you miss a period. Person prescribing the drug was supposed to have the ability to rule out an ectopic pregnancy. I'm going to get into that whole category of why you need an ultrasound, but let me stick with your changes. So they were supposed to have the ability at least to rule out an ectopic pregnancy and make sure the baby was in the womb, because Mifepristone does not treat ectopic pregnancies. They were supposed to have a follow-up visit to make sure that they didn't have tissue left inside, because they knew having tissue left inside was a problem. A lot of studies in Europe that were looking at the fact that you get retained tissue, and the further in pregnancy you are, the greater the risk of retained tissue. Okay. So in 2002, AAPLOG, with some other organizations, submitted to the FDA a citizen petition saying, hey, look, you didn't test this drug in the pediatric population. You just said, go ahead and give it to kids, even though testing in the pediatric population was required. You didn't require an ultrasound, so you have no way of knowing whether this woman has an ectopic pregnancy. We just listed out all the problems with the approval, which was fast-tracked. It was insufficient. The studies on the initial approval, the studies are supposed to be 2 randomized, blinded, placebo-controlled trials. There was 1 trial that was not randomized, blinded, or controlled.
Wow.
Okay. That was the basis of the approval. I mean, there were, if you're
How could they
interested,
approve something when it doesn't even meet the approval requirements?
I'll tell you how they could approve it. President Clinton at the time instructed the FDA that they would approve this drug, period. Okay. It was a political approval from the get-go. Okay, so that's 2000. Many problems. When you get to 2004, 2005, the first couple years, there were 4 women that died. Young, healthy women who were pregnant, dead 2 weeks after taking the abortion drug. What's going on? Turns out the same thing was happening in Canada. One of the fathers of of one of the girls that died, the girl that died was Holly Patterson. The father is Monty Patterson. He's a contractor, but a brilliant man. He's looking at the literature. He's reading the scientific literature. He sees this death in Canada in the Canadian trials. He contacts the FDA and says, what's going on here? My daughter died. Somebody else has just died in Canada. What are you guys doing about it? So the FDA and CDC met together in 2006, and they said, ooh, this is a problem. She was dead from a soil bacteria called Clostridium sordelii. We all have soil bacteria. This happens because there's dead tissue present. Okay. And these women, once they get the C. sordelii infection, they die within days. It's rapidly progressive. And by the time you can even intervene, you still have 90 to 95% of the people dying from this drug.
And
or
you're
from
saying
this
this
bacteria.
infection is because remains from the baby remain in the uterus, causing an infection inside the woman. And if she's doing this at home, she may not know, and then all of a sudden she spikes a fever, she's feeling sick.
This is the thing, Irina. She doesn't spike a fever.
Oh,
She just feels funny. She feels bad. And she goes to the ER, and she doesn't look that sick, but her white blood count is off the charts. Her white blood count is very, very high. That is your only clue. And it's not just because of the dead tissue. Mifepristone itself suppresses the progesterone receptors in the immune system. And because it suppresses the immune system, these women can't fight off this common bacteria. This agent, it's Clostridium sordelii, this agent that many of us have all the time. We're all exposed to soil. And they can't fight it off because of the mifepristone. And that's what came out at the FDA CDC meeting. In fact, one of the researchers there even said, you got to think about not using mifepristone for abortion. Anyway, instead of taking the drug off the market, which they should have done then, with that huge safety signal, they said, oh, well, instead of allowing her to take the second drug by mouth, we're just going to have her take the second drug through the vagina. Okay. And what that did is women are still dying from Clostridium sordelii. Mm-hmm. Look up adverse events, the mortality rate for Mifeprex. It's called the adverse events summary, I believe. And what you'll find is this big paragraph. There's, I think, about 36 women who've died so far. Many of them have died from infection, and most of the infection is Clostridium sordelii. So it's still going on. It's still a problem because Mifeprex itself suppresses the immune system. Anyway, that's 2000. That's 2008. Fast forward, the FDA still hasn't responded to our initial citizen petition back in 2002, even though they have 120 days to respond. They still haven't responded. the end of the Obama administration, 2016, they respond to our citizen petition the same day that they make all these changes. The response to our citizen petition was, we disagree, period. Thank you very much. No detail, no argumentation, no rationale. We disagree. We got lots of studies on our side. Not really. They didn't really. And at the same time, they did a couple things. They said, well, you don't have to have an in-person dispensing, and you don't have to watch the woman take the drug. You can you don't have to follow up to make sure she doesn't have tissue left inside, and you don't have to keep track of any complications. Okay, so the initial approval, one of the post-marketing restrictions was that the abortionists had to report any complication they knew about to Danco Pharmacy, who would then make a summary and send it to the FDA. Well, you can see where there's a lot of reasons an abortionist isn't going to report the complications. And if they do report it, Danco is going to send it on. So that was the process. So FDA puts those complications on what's called the FAERS, the Adverse Event Reporting System. It's online. You can see you can see an FDA summary of these complications. Myself and several other researchers said, okay, we're going to pull them. We're going to get the actual adverse event reports, and we're going to make a summary. We're going to see what is happening with women. It's horrendous. And we published that. It's I think Kathy Altman. So it's Altman, and I believe it's 2019 is when we got it published. What we found that most of the reports were so poor, you couldn't even tell what was happening. It was things like woman bled, sent to the ER. No blood pressure, no hemoglobin hematocrit. No way to know, is this a small hemorrhage or is this a life-threatening hemorrhage? Well, some of the women had life-threatening hemorrhages, more than you would see in an automobile accident. We had some women that we documented 10 units of blood. I mean, that's a lot of blood. That's major trauma blood. And, so we documented, I'm not going to go into exquisite detail, but just to say, we found some very interesting things. One of them was the complications aren't being handled by the abortionist. They're being handled by the ER docs. Okay, so over half of the complications were handled by the ER docs. The abortion has nothing to do with it. The other thing was the abortionist didn't even know about the deaths. So there were a couple of reports where the abortionist writes in and says, well, I read about the death of my patient, a couple weeks later, and this is modern medicine? You gotta be kidding me. The abortionists are not taking responsibility for what they're doing. They're making a major intervention and not taking any responsibility. Like I said, in any other area of medicine, this is write the check malpractice.
And in fact, I know that abortion facilities are telling their patients, here are the drugs. If you have complications, just go to the ER. Don't come to us. Go to the ER. So they're making the profit from giving the abortion pills to the women, and then they're putting this on the healthcare system and the ER to pick up the mess, the pieces of what they left behind, which is women being hurt, women having infections, women hemorrhaging, women dying, and they're not even taking responsibility for this.
That is 100% correct, Irina. And it's not medicine. Okay, that's not what medicine's about. That's definitely not what OB-GYN's about.
And it's not caring for women. They don't care for women's health. That's the biggest irony, is that they claim so much that all of this is for women's health, but they don't actually care for women's health who are going through this abortion, and they're not even looking, like you said, they don't require the ultrasounds, they don't require the follow-ups, none of that. And now with the FDA update, women can take them up to 10 weeks, but we don't even know. As you said, women who are even past 10 weeks, they don't even know how far along they are. They're ordering these abortion pills by mail from who knows where. They could be ordering them from Mexico or from China, from wherever, don't even know what's in them. And then they're taking them in the privacy of their own home and then suffering these terrible consequences and then rushing to the ER where they may die, or just it could affect their fertility. at the very least, etc., if they have any complications from this.
Yeah,
And
you're spot on.
and let's not even talk about the fact that the trauma of having to pass their own babies in the toilet or at home, bleeding, etc. I mean, these are the things that are not really talked about, but it's important to understand what it means to have a chemical abortion. And this is all part of it. I want to just a quick history of chemical abortion. It started in France, correct?
Yeah, the sad fact is that in the 1960s, 70s, there was a lot of money made available for finding a drug that could antagonize progesterone. And when I went through the drug development literature for Mifepristone, yes, a lot of it was done by Roussel-Uclaf, which is why you have RU in front of it. Okay, it's Roussel-Uclaf 38486 and then 486 and then Mifepristone. Anyway, that was France, and that's where it was originally developed. But some of the money for the development of RU46 came from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Services in the US.
Wow.
So we have our federal tax dollars funding the drug development of a luteolytic drug like, like RU46. It's very sad, and I was very discouraged to find that when I was looking over the drug development literature. And I think it's something that we have to acknowledge that there has not been the political will to remove the drug. And in fact, there has been a strong political will to keep the drug because we funded it. We funded the development. So RU46 is approved in France, and then the Clinton administration writes to Roussel-Uclaf and says, bring the drug to the US. And Roussel-Uclaf said, no way, baby, because we're not facing the lawsuits that are going to come from it. And he says, you need to do it anyway. So he brokers a deal between Population Council, Planned Parenthood, and Roussel-Uclaf, where Roussel-Uclaf sells the right to manufacture and distribute for, I don't know, $1. I don't know what they exchanged. Basically gave them the right to manufacture and distribute. But Planned Parenthood and Population Council don't manufacture anything. But they form a shell company called Danco, which has its assets in the Cayman Islands so that it can't be sued.
Wow.
And Danco doesn't manufacture anything, so they contract with Hualin Pharmaceuticals in China to manufacture. Hualin Pharmaceuticals was at that time under censure from the FDA for its drug manufacturing practices.
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up. So anyway, that's where Danco is getting its drugs from China, a censored company, and distributing it all over the country with no legal risk. And that's why they haven't been sued, because they don't have a deep pocket because their assets are in the Cayman Islands. So it's really it's a brilliant setup. It's a heinous setup, and it's brilliant.
It's a scheme, really.
And it was a top-down scheme to bring this drug into the US and then market it as some kind of an advance when it actually isn't. It's actually very dangerous. And you hit on some of the things that happened. I was just up to 2016, but what happened in 2019 and 2020? Now the drug is basically available over the counter, even though it's not approved as over the counter. But when you have an online ordering system and you don't have to see a pharmacist, all you have to do is log in and say, I want the drug. Here's my address, and here's my credit card, and you get the drug. There's no approval in that at all. There's no oversight in that at all. And the patients are told, when you go to the ER, tell them you're miscarrying, which is really dangerous for patients. I was involved with a review of the Medicaid database where we looked at women who had purchased Mifepristone and Misoprostol, the two drugs of the drug regimen, and then later ended up in the ER with a complication. Those that identified as having had a chemical abortion had less complications than those that identified as having a miscarriage. And the reason is because you expect different things. With the chemical abortion drug, you expect more bleeding. You'd be checked to make sure that there's no retained tissue, et cetera, et cetera. If you're having a natural miscarriage, the doctor is expecting a different set of things. And so those people that lied ended up with more hospitalizations, a longer hospital course, and a more complicated course. So it doesn't help the women to lie. It just complicates the course and prevents the doc from actually doing an accurate assessment of their problems. So that's what we have right now. Right now we have so many problems with the way it's dispensed. Without knowing that the baby is inside the womb, which takes an ultrasound, you've got 3% of women who have babies that are in their tube. The symptoms of that's called an ectopic pregnancy. The symptoms of a rupturing ectopic pregnancy, which is how a lot of women die, is pain and bleeding. The symptoms of a Mifepristone abortion is pain and bleeding. And when we reviewed the adverse event reports, I told you we got all of the actual reports from the FDA by FOIA. We saw there were women who called in, I've got lots of pain and bleeding, and they were told, honey, this is a Mifepristone abortion. Take a Tylenol and go to bed. And they died. They died because their tube ruptured and they bled to death before they could get to the hospital. So it's not just a little thing. When you don't know where the pregnancy is, you're intervening in a biological process. You haven't even made a diagnosis. Write the check malpractice, guys. You have to know where that baby is, and you have to have an ultrasound to do that. And then, like I said, women don't know how far along they are, but also there are women who are what's called Rh negative. It's a blood type. And those women who are Rh negative need a medicine called Rogam so that the next time they get pregnant, they don't form an allergic reaction literally to their baby. These women that are getting the drugs over the internet aren't getting Rogam. Nobody's taking care of them. And you want to make it even worse, Serena? Who's to say that the person ordering the drugs is the person getting it? Some of those websites offer a bulk discount. Who would want a bulk discount for abortion drugs? Pimps and abusers. What a thought. And you've got all these stories coming through the media. They have been for the last 10 years of boyfriends taking and crushing up the Mifepristone and putting them in the smoothie so that the girlfriend who wants the baby aborts. I mean, this forced abortion, this coerced abortion, it's huge. It's a huge issue. And it enables pimps and sex traffickers and abusers to abort the women that they impregnate and have no consequences. So I just wanted to put those things in. It's not just, the problem is so big that the drug needs to just come off the market.
Yeah. And as you said, if these abortionists are encouraging women to lie when they go to the ER to say they're having a miscarriage, again, they're doing a disservice to women's health. Because, as you
Absolutely.
said, the ER doctors are looking for different things when there's a natural miscarriage than when there's a chemical abortion taking place. So they're endangering women's lives and their health and telling them to lie to
Yeah.
other medical professionals at a ER in a hospital so that they can get away with it. And as you said, this is super dangerous for women, and it's a problem. Now, this is completely, I would say, this just coincidental, completely coincidental. But you said that it was Rousseau Uclof in France, and then the 486 is the serial number, right? 3486.
It's the drug number. So the original drug development number was RU 38486. So if you want to go back to the original drug development literature, plug in that number into PubMed, but then it got shortened to RU46, which then got changed to Mifepristone, and then the trade name is Mifepristone. Yep.
Now, it's purely coincidental, but obviously people have made the link between RU4 and then 86 is to get rid of, to die, etc. That there's those things roaming the internet. It's purely coincidental. It wasn't named RU4 86ing somebody, but it just so happened that the serial number has that. So just to allay any stories on there, it's coincidental. It's an interesting, weird coincidence, but it is coincidental nevertheless. So I just wanted to mention that because you might see that on some websites that you go on. I wanted to go into the FDA safety program called REMS, the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. And of course, they had tighter controls, and the program changed in 2011. Why does it matter? Even in the way that we look at the adverse events, etc.
Okay, so when RU46 Mifepristone was first approved, it was approved under a special permission, federal permission called Subpart H. Subpart H was a way that the FDA could fast track drugs that were used for life-threatening conditions. Okay. So to approve RU46, they had to define pregnancy as a life-threatening condition. Well, it's not. It's a natural process. Most women are very happy about it. The overwhelming majority of women have no complications, but so it was approved under that fast track authorization. There must have been somebody with a shred of integrity at the FDA, because that fast track approval also allowed for the FDA to put on what's called post-marketing restrictions. That is, they could restrict how the drug was used. Typically, when the FDA approves a drug, that's the last thing they have to say about it. And docs can use a drug any willy-nilly way they want. But where these fast-track drugs, they recognize that they're putting drugs on the market that are dangerous, that you can only mitigate the dangers by having some control. So those post-marketing restrictions were formalized when Congress created a program called the REMS, which is the Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategy. So the post-marketing restrictions for RU46 became the REMS for RU46. So not past 7 weeks, in-person dispensing, you needed to follow up, all those were REMS. So when they relaxed the REMS, they relaxed those post-marketing restrictions. Oh, and the very important post-marketing restriction was that all the adverse events had to be reported. Okay. So when 2016 came around and they relaxed the rest of the rest of the REMS at that point, they also said you don't have to report any complications anymore. You only have to report the deaths. Now, this becomes really interesting. And like I said, you couldn't make this stuff up. When in 2019 and 2021, they looked at the changes that were made in 2016, like, you didn't have to be in person to watch the woman take the drug. You didn't have to follow up. They actually said, and I have the letter, they said, we have evaluated the adverse events that have been reported since 2016, and there was no increase in the reported adverse events, and therefore we know that this is safe. I'm like, you dropped the requirement.
That's
You gotta be
crazy.
kidding me. But that's literally their justification for allowing this willy-nilly use of the drug now, is that there weren't more adverse events reported when they actually dropped the requirement for adverse event reporting.
It's really the equivalent of trying to cover your ears, close your eyes. We don't want to hear about the adverse events. We don't want to
Yep.
hear about that. Only if women die, we want to hear about that.
Yep.
So I guess we're not requiring it, and you're not volunteering that information, and we don't
Right.
know, because since you've made it people can get it on the internet without any oversight, they've made it really easy to get the drugs, and with no requirements to talk about the adverse events.
Right.
And then this is their justification for continuing to push it on the market as something that is quote unquote safe, when obviously it isn't.
Well, and that's the whole reason why this report from Ethics and Public Policy Center was so important, because they went back and looked at insurance claims data. Women who had purchased Mifepristone and Misoprostol, what were their complication rates? And they found 22 times the complication rates that the FDA stated that they found in the trials that were done. These clinical trials are all done by the abortion industry. So what do you expect? In some of those trials, I looked at them. Some of those trials ignored hemorrhage. Well, you got women hemorrhaging all over the place,
Mm.
and they just simply don't report it as a complication, and so it doesn't exist. It's crazy. It's crazy. So that's why that report was so important. And it offers real world data that isn't the abortionist reporting to Danco, reporting to the FDA. It's actually who paid what for what. You know, people track money, and that information is important, and it's an important way of looking at real world complications, which I hope the FDA is actually taking a look at.
And to clarify, the pro-abortion industry does not care if you hemorrhage. They don't
No, they
really
don't.
care about your health. They don't
Yeah,
wanna know about it, they don't care about it, the FDA doesn't wanna hear about it. So if you're sitting there and you're hemorrhaging, you have an infection, unless you die, the FDA does not care. And at that point, it's too late. And so this is crazy that this drug is allowed on the market, the way, and it's irresponsible, it's malpractice, it's abuse of
yeah.
power. It's crazy. It gets me very upset. Um, and
Me too.
now on October 2nd of 2025, the FDA approved another generic version of Mifepristone. Why is this significant?
Well, this adds one more source of mifepristone being peddled online like any other drug peddler. And the FDA could have waited until they completed their safety review. It is it is unbelievable to me that they approved this generic, which actually I think the application came in like 4 years ago. They approved this generic before they completed their safety review of the drug. That
And also
makes no
they
sense to
approved
me.
it under the Trump administration, which is supposed to be pro-life. Can you explain that?
I am not a politician, and I I can't explain it. Like I said, I'm trying to understand what was in the mind of the FDA to approve a another peddler of a drug that they are under safety review for. That just is it's inexplicable.
Mhm. So you said it doesn't actually pass any safety reviews yet. It's the safety reviews are still in process and they approved it.
The safety well, it's not that the generic has to have no safety reviews. It's that the FDA, they tell us, are currently in the process of looking at the safety of mifepristone, and yet they approved another peddler of the drug. Again, that's inexplicable to me. I don't know what was in their brain.
That's crazy. And we already went over the mechanism of action. Like you said, mifepristone thins the uterine lining, and so the baby can't implant. And the misoprostol causes the contractions. Can you talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about what happens in the body when
yeah.
you take them, how far apart you take them, and then what are the risks of both of the drugs? You mentioned obviously some the infection, etc., but
Yeah.
if you can talk a little bit more about that as well.
Okay, so what mifepristone does, or Ella does, depends on when in your cycle you take it. So I really suggest that all women track their cycles so they know when they're ovulating and when they expect their next period and when they're fertile and when they're not. I'm a big believer in knowing your body.
And we
Okay.
will do a show just on that.
Yes, good. But if you take mifepristone or Ella before you release an egg, then it will may interfere with the egg release, or the egg may be released and it'll interfere, like you said, with the lining so that the baby that's formed in the fallopian tube can't then implant. But if you take mifepristone or Ella after the baby's already implanted, which is the week after you release an egg, so if you take it at that point or afterward, what it does is it blocks the mom's side of the placenta uh, from the baby's side of the placenta. It kills the cells that
Mhm.
respond to progesterone on the mom's side, so that the baby starves. Okay, and when the baby starves, it can't get nutrients, it dies. But it isn't always pushed out of the womb at that point. In fact, only about 1 out of 5 times I'm sorry, only about 5% of women will actually push the baby out with just the mifepristone or with the Ella. The other 95% of the time, they need a second drug to cause the uterus to contract to squeeze the baby and the placenta out. And that second drug is Cytotec or Misoprostol. And that it's interesting. I'll just have to say something here. The manufacturers of Cytotec never authorized their drug to be used in this process, by the way.
Wow.
The FDA approved an indication for a drug that the manufacturers never authorized. Again, completely illegal. But anyway, that's what the second drug does. So even with the second drug, the further along you are in pregnancy, the less effective the uterus is at squeezing all the tissue out. And when you have tissue left inside, then it's just like dead tissue anywhere. It gets infected. And that infection can, like you said, cause the woman to not be able to conceive children later because of the damage that's done from the infection. It can move to her whole body and cause her to get sick and die, especially if it's a Clostridium sordelii infection. And then you got a 90% mortality. It's a serious thing to have tissue left inside. And it's not a joke that the original approval said you have to be seen 2 weeks later, and they have to make sure you've completed this process. And now you can walk around for months, guys, with tissue left inside, all that time being at risk for infection.
Hopefully, this is eye-opening for our listeners, and we encourage the listeners to actually bring it to your state legislators, to write to the FDA, to really say we have a problem with this. Women are not provided for. They're not cared for. This is not safe. But we leave that up to you based on these conversations. But this is for your knowledge and awareness to share with your friends and family, since chemical abortion is so predominant right now in terms of the kinds of abortions that are available and done. So how does the experience of a chemical abortion compare physically and emotionally to a surgical abortion? And by surgical abortion, we mean when you go into a facility and they actually remove the baby. There are obviously different abortion procedures, but that any of those abortion procedures done in a clinic, in a facility, are considered surgical abortions. But how does the experience of a chemical abortion differ from surgical abortion, and also how do these differ from a natural miscarriage?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking that question. If anyone's interested in a deep dive, there's a website called abortionprocedures.com. Very good for explaining in detail. But basically, with a surgical abortion, what happens is the womb is opened and the baby's removed. How open the womb has to be depends on how big the baby is. So the further you are in pregnancy, again, the more damage can be done to the opening of the womb. And the further you are in pregnancy with the surgical abortion, later when you try to conceive, if the womb has been opened enough to cause damage, then you may not be able to carry the baby. It's called premature birth or preterm birth. One of the highest reasons for very preterm birth, the ones, the little babies in the incubator, one of the biggest reasons is late-term abortions with surgical abortions. So it does damage to open the womb surgically. But when you go in for a surgical abortion, some places give you anesthesia, some places give you no anesthesia and remove the baby. But in that case, you may not see the baby. And especially if you were put to sleep, you may go in, you were pregnant, you wake up, you're not. It's very different when you give yourself the drugs and you were told it's just a blob of tissue, and what you see passing out passing out of your body has a head and arms and legs and fingers
And
and
fingers
toes.
and toes.
And there's a website called Abortion Changes You, and that's an interesting one to look at. What I can tell you is pregnancy care centers around the country have had this thing happen over the last 3 or 4 years. And that is, their post-abortion ministries used to be women who were 5, 10 years out from the abortion coming in, and a few. They are now flooded with women who are calling in a week after the abortion, 2 weeks after the abortion, saying, they didn't tell me this was a baby. I didn't know. And then when I saw it, what could I do? Like, it's a
Mm.
different psychological thing. It's also different when you've gone to an abortion facility and you've had the surgical abortion. You don't have to drive by that facility again. A lot of women say they get PTSD driving down the same block. They just avoid the abortion clinic so that they don't have to remember. What happens if the abortion clinic's your bathroom?
Mm.
You are re-traumatized every time you enter the bathroom. And this is a way different psychological situation than when somebody else is doing the abortion to you versus you've been the one taking the pills and you're the one there present and you're the one looking at the tissue. And then what do you do with the baby? There have been calls. I've actually talked to pregnancy care center directors who have said, we got a call today. The woman put the baby in her freezer because she didn't want to flush it and she didn't know what to do with it and she can't afford to bury this baby. This is the kind
Mm.
of insanity that goes on when you cause a woman to abort herself and no one's taking care of her.
And no one's
What
talking about it
No one's
because
talking about it.
who wants to talk about that? That's so gruesome. That's so scary and
I'm
traumatic.
sorry.
But these women are experiencing this trauma on their own and maybe just have a couple friends to talk with about it. But the fact that this is happening, 2/3 of abortions in the US are
Yeah,
this. How many women are walking around with that trauma, with the potential physical effects, the emotional, etc. And we will do a show on post-abortion counseling as well and
yeah.
post-abortion healing, because this in and of itself requires just another deep dive because so many people have been affected by
Yeah.
abortion and there are so many resources for women who've been affected by abortion. But this it was really powerful what you said, that a woman who's had an abortion at an abortion facility can avoid it, but when that abortion facility is your own home, your own bathroom, and you have those memories, how can you move past that? It's traumatizing to think of that.
And I should have given some sort of a trigger warning that what I'm about to say is really hard. And we are intimately aware at APLOG of of the trauma that these women are going through because we do interdigitate with pregnancy care centers. Many of us are pregnancy care center directors. We see it. We're not above this, and it's not an issue of condemning that woman. It's an issue of realizing she is a second victim in this. She's been duped and she's been abused. And the whole self-abortion is a kind of an abuse. And I think leads to the other topic of, this may be even more abuse heaped on abuse. We're sensitive to that and we're looking for ways to respond and help these women they've been tricked, they've been manipulated, and they haven't been given informed consent. And like I said, lack of informed consent before a medical procedure is malpractice. And I would just encourage you to look into that. If you've been one of those women who've been duped, who've been abused, look into that because the only way to stop this kind of thing is to make the abortion industry understand that this is not the way you treat patients. This is
And make
not
the abortion
patient care.
industry accountable, being
Accountable. That was the word I was looking for.
accountable,
Which went accountable
and
for this.
across the board. I mean, even when we're talking about physical abortion facilities,
Yeah.
they have less regulations than your local pool, than your local restaurant, than
Yep.
your local, um any of those have more regulations. Even a vet's office or where you get your hair cut has more regulations, more safety standards than your local abortion facility. And that again is another episode. We can talk about all the regulation break, the way that they have broken so many health and safety standards at a physical abortion facility. With chemical abortion, it makes that problem even bigger because it's people's own homes. It's available on the internet, and it's that much harder to control what happens. What's interesting is that, of course, the abortion advocates give the lie that this is empowering. It gives women the chance to take control. So, what's missing from that narrative?
Well, they're not reading their own literature. If you go to the Guttmacher website, at least as of a year ago, and you put in their search reasons women abort, it'll break your heart. I had no money. My boyfriend said I could abort or we break up. By the way, most relationships break up after an abortion. My parents said I couldn't live at home anymore. I have no food. I have no place to stay. This is not empowerment, guys. This is coercion. This and what happens after an abortion, sometimes I'd encourage you, if you haven't had an abortion, find one of your friends who has and talk to them and say, "What happened to your life after the abortion?" Most women will say, "My life fell apart after the abortion." There's increase in suicide, drug abuse, hospitalizable major depression. The abortion solves nothing and creates its own set of mental health problems afterward, because then you realize, not only have I had an abortion and I lost this child, but now I'm really screwed up because I can't heal from it. If I have a miscarriage, okay, I've miscarried 3 times myself. I can tell somebody and they'll say, "Look, I'm sorry, I recognize your loss." They can heart to heart with me. If I have an abortion, I can't tell anybody. I can't grieve it. It's so complicated that it becomes a huge mental health issue. And this is not empowerment. Abuse is not empowerment. Lying to women is not empowerment. Endangering their lives is not empowerment. The biggest lie is that abortion has anything to do with empowerment. It's disempowerment.
And not offering informed consent is not empowerment. As you said,
Right.
women are realizing after their baby is dead that it was actually a baby and they were lied to, saying,
Yeah.
"Well, your baby's not is not a it's just a blob of tissue." And so how is that empowering? I really think it's important what you said about informed consent, that women are not given informed consent about what's actually happening, how developed is their baby. None of that is shared. And also women who've had abortions may remember the anniversary date, may think, "Oh, well, my baby would have been 5 years old now or 10 years old." And so there's also a psychological aspect of that where they kind of in the back of their mind, they think, "This is how old my baby would have been if I ended up having the baby." And there are a lot of resources and support communities and retreats for, post-abortive women. We will definitely talk about that, and not just post-abortive women, post-abortive men too. Men suffer. We will do a show just on the men's side of things, and what they go through, because talk about lack of empowerment. A dad in the picture has zero control what happens to their baby, because since it's the quote unquote woman's choice. So we'll talk about that as well. What kind of follow-up care do women typically need after a chemical abortion? We talked a little bit about this, but obviously there's follow-up care after a surgical abortion, and of course, any abortion is evil, is the killing of a human life. So we do not advocate for abortions at all. When abortions are legal, we must at least care for the health and safety of women. Basic. Basic that we care for them. So what kind of follow-up is given to women who have surgical abortions? And we talked a little bit about the fact that there isn't follow-up with chemical abortions.
So let me contrast 2 things. When a woman calls her OB-GYN and says, "I've miscarried," then typically the OB-GYN will bring her in the office, will make a diagnosis, like do an ultrasound and say, "Yeah, you're right. There's no heartbeat here. Here's how far along your baby was. Here are your options. You can go naturally. You can have us remove the baby who's died." You have that kind of conversation. And you have a follow-up visit. The follow-up visit is to make sure she doesn't have an infection, she doesn't have any tissue left inside, and to talk with her about going forward from here. What do you do, as far as when are you planning on trying again? It's a conversation. You care about them. Plus, a lot of OB-GYN offices will give them a grief packet, when hello means goodbye. I mean, like I said, I've miscarried 3 times. I have several of those packets which show somebody cares And here's the mental health resources if you find you need them. You're connected in with social work. It's normal medicine. What do you get after an abortion? Well, at the very least, beforehand, you should have gotten informed consent. And if I'm seeing someone who's had an abortion, I give them the same kind of care that I would give someone who has had a pregnancy loss, a natural pregnancy loss. They need connected with social work. They need connected with somebody that they can talk to, post-abortion counseling. They need to know that somebody cares. There's somebody they can talk to. And they need the practical things like no infection, no tissue left inside. Let's follow up again in 3 months and let's make sure that your periods have returned back to normal. Normal OB care. So that's not what they're getting from the abortion industry, even with the surgical abortion. With the chemical abortion, as we talked about, they're not getting any of it. And yeah, it's a problem. If I'd see someone after a chemical abortion, the first thing I'd do is make sure that she had no tissue left inside and that she didn't have an infection, because those two are huge problems with abortion. And then connecting her to post-abortion counseling so she has somebody that she can talk to who's going to listen and be able to actually help her through all the horrific trauma that she's just encountered.
Wow. I want to talk a little bit more about. I saw that in the CDC in their 2022 abortion surveillance report. There's a table in there, table 13, that shows that chemical abortions are occurring way past the 70-day mark. One, how are they tracking that, since it's hard to actually track when women are taking the chemical abortion pills? And what's your reaction to that?
Yeah. So who knows how far along? It's very interesting. I saw that too, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. How'd you get that data? Because it's all voluntary reporting. So that means abortionists are giving Mifeprex beyond the time limit. And I'm very curious to know how CDC got that information. And if abortionists are giving it beyond that time limit, why in the heck are they still allowed to dispense Mifeprex? So it's one thing to make a REMS. It's another thing to have the political will to enforce the REMS. Those people should never have been allowed to dispense Mifeprex in the first place if you actually cared about enforcing the REMS. And this is it. This is so tied up in political will and what we're willing to do. We can make, a pretty picture of, oh yes, there's all these controls, when in fact the reality is there aren't, because they aren't being enforced. They aren't being enforced.
Yeah. And another note about the quote unquote empowerment issue, you already spoke about this too before, about the fact that one, they're not women are not given informed consent, but also that um, there could be uh, sex traffickers, pimps putting stuff in a woman's drink, etc., so that she would have an abortion. But there's been stories about even boyfriends and husbands
Yeah,
who don't want another child slipping this into their wife or girlfriend's drinks. And so, who is this really empowering? One, you're not empowering women because they don't actually know the risks and involved and even how developed their baby is. But two, it could also be quote unquote empowering other people who will kill your child without your consent.
exactly.
So, I wanted to just mention that, because we did bring it up, and again, these are the risks you run when you have a drug that's just available to anybody. First of all, it is abused. It is an abuse of. It's not medicine is for health. When you
Right.
use any kind of drug to harm, it's no longer medicine. It's a killing device, really, in the form of a drug. So you talk about women-centered medicine, and what would be the truly compassionate, life-affirming care, and what would that look like for women who feel that abortion is their only option?
Pregnancy care centers are outstanding at this. What they do is they actually have a conversation with the woman. Okay, so you're pregnant. What are the circumstances in your life? What's going on? What kinds of things make you think that abortion is the answer? How much do you know about the abortion procedure? What circumstances would have to change to make it possible for you to bring this baby to birth? Do you understand? You have all these resources in your community. We can connect you. This is what pregnancy care centers do the best. And decades of research as to what helps women to see that they have more than one option and what helps them to understand. And oftentimes it's as simple, nothing in this is simple, but oftentimes one thing that's very helpful is for them to actually be able to see the ultrasound. If an abortionist does an ultrasound, they turn the camera away so the woman can't see it. Why? Because they know once she recognizes that there's another person in there,
And
it's
there's a
gonna
heartbeat.
change. There's a heartbeat, arms and legs, baby's waving. You know, some of these babies perform really well. But I will have to share, um, I'll have to share a story about that, and that is that the men really do need to step up to the plate. So this is one of the things that actually got me involved in the pro-life movement. I had a patient who was pregnant, whose I insisted that the boyfriend come in for the ultrasound, and he refused to look at it. And I had the conversation with her. The baby was like 10 weeks along, performing very well, waving, and she could see the baby there. And she said, Dr. Harrison, I can't do this. I've raised one child who is currently 13. I can't do it alone. And the boyfriend said, nothing. And I said, okay, so you're telling me that if you had support, if you had someone to walk through this, that raising the baby with you, you would you would keep this baby. She said, I could keep it, but I can't do it alone. And the boyfriend said, nothing. And I'm not a very patient person. I went like a couple cycles of this, and I finally said, I'll just call him Fred. I said, Fred, stand up and get over here and look at this picture. So I forced him to look at it. And then he went back and sat down. I said, Fred, do you hear what your girlfriend is saying? And he said, well, it's her body, it's her choice. He went back to reading his paper, and that was the end. She
Mm,
decided she would abort.
mm.
She came back to see me afterward. I said, you know, how you doing? She said, it's the worst decision I ever made in my whole life. I wish I'd never done it. I wish you'd have talked me out of it. Well, at that time, I didn't know all the complications, but it was that experience that made me say, never again is there going to be an OB who doesn't know what the complications are from abortion. And I really kind of, that was one of the things that propelled me to work with AAPLOG to work with complications.
Wow.
But the other thing was, I said, what happened to Fred? She said, I dumped him. She said, he wasn't there for me. And I knew at that moment that he'll never be there for me when I really need him. And so it was an eye-opening experience to me that, and I'm sure it's probably common with a lot of women who all they need is for the father of the baby to say, honey, I'm with you. I'm with you. We're doing this together. I love you. I love you, our baby. That would change the whole situation because abortion is a marker of abandonment. It's just a marker of abandonment. And what do? You have to change that whole culture of abandonment. And so that's where the movement is for the future. How do you change the culture of abandonment? How do you engage fathers, turn the hearts of their fathers toward the children, if you know what I'm saying? Okay. How do you do that? And I think that's part of what we have to recognize. These women they're abandoned and they're hurting. What do you do with someone who's been abandoned and hurting? They need a lot of TLC from every different level. It's not just medical. They need personal TLC, and anything you can do to help a woman in that situation will help.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this on a previous show that there was a poll done about why women get abortions. This was a few years back. And basically, the number one reasons were if the boyfriend, the husband, or the mom were not supportive of keeping the
Yep.
baby. If you take away a woman's support system of the father of the baby and potentially her mom, that will those are the number one reasons. There are obviously other reasons, but if she knows that she has help and the support that she needs, the chances are of her keeping that baby are huge. And
Yes.
God bless the courage of women who don't have that support and say, I will not abort, even though I don't have the support. I'll be a single mom or my family will disown me. And this is why not choosing abortion is such a courageous choice. And we'll talk about adoption too, et cetera. Those
Yeah.
are very courageous choices in situations where a woman is really walking by herself, where she shouldn't be walking by herself. And it's, again, I think that calling the men to man up. Look, that's your son, that's your daughter in there, and the same with the parents saying, "That's your grandson, that's your granddaughter in there." And so protect your daughter who's going through this, but also protect your grandchild. It is super important, and I think that that will change the inner culture. That'll change the culture when women feel supported, and not
Yep.
only by the people closest to them, but by the community. And again, this is why pregnancy centers are so
Yep.
helpful, so important because they offer the support when a woman may not have that support from anyone in her circle.
Yep.
And it's amazing. They'll offer clothes and do the ultrasounds and refer her to doctors and help her find a job, find housing, whatever she might need to be able to do this and have an easier time, they are there for
Yeah.
them. So we really encourage pregnancy resource centers for anyone who's in a situation where they don't feel like they have the support or are feeling overwhelmed about their own pregnancy and what life is going to look like after the birth of the child. So really encourage people to find their local pregnancy center. They're everywhere. Just a quick Google search, you'll find them. So, Donna, there's been an ongoing discussion about abortion pill reversal
Mhm.
using progesterone. You were talking earlier about how mifepristone blocks progesterone. So, how does giving progesterone to a woman potentially save her baby after she takes the first abortion pill?
I'm so glad you asked this, Serena, because this is really important for women to understand. So we talked about how progesterone allows the woman's body to feed the baby. Progesterone's involved in after fertilization, the baby traveling down the tube and then implanting in the womb and feeding the baby in the womb. That's all progesterone dependent. Mifeprex blocks progesterone at the progesterone receptor in the cell. So when Mifeprex is around, and they give a lot of Mifeprex in the abortion drugs, it means that progesterone can't bind to the receptor and cause the actions that need to happen.
Mhm.
The good news is that it's a basic principle in biochemistry that this kind of receptor binding is called competitive, and it's reversible. So the mifepristone doesn't just bind and stay there. It binds and releases. But if you've got more progesterone around, then progesterone can outcompete mifeprex. And so when the receptors open, the progesterone comes in and binds, and receptors open and more progesterone binds because there's more progesterone around than mifepristone. The other really good news is that we've used progesterone in pregnancy for almost 6 decades, 60 years. We've been giving it to women that have a problem producing their own progesterone, that they miscarry. So we have really good safety data on progesterone, and progesterone is really good for pregnancies. So we know that by giving the progesterone, we're actually out-competing mifeprex. We're reversing mifeprex poisoning. So if you want to think of another analogy, when someone has carbon monoxide poisoning, okay, carbon monoxide binds to the blood cells that carry oxygen, and it prevents your body from carrying oxygen. But if you give high dose oxygen, you can kick the carbon monoxide off of the red blood cells and actually overcome the poisoning. So progesterone is the antidote to mifepristone poisoning, even to the point where a pro-choice endocrinologist in the New York Times was asked, well, does this work? And he said, well, if my daughter somehow got an accidental mifepristone poisoning, I'd do the same thing. I'd give her progesterone for, a few weeks and probably she'd do fine. So that it's basic basic biochemistry. It's like biochemistry 101 to do this. It's basic, the way you treat any kind of poisoning. So the good news is, I think there's like over 4,000 babies who are alive at this point, who would not be alive because their moms got progesterone. Now, it's not 100%. So when you talk about how much does this help, it takes her chances of, if she takes just Mifepristone alone, doesn't do anything else, she's got maybe a 1 out of 5, maybe 1 out of 10 chance that her baby will survive just that dose of Mifepristone and keep going. Depends a little bit on how far along she is. But if you give progesterone after the Mifepristone within 72 hours, then you take that 1 out of 5 chance, which is 25%, and or 20%, and then that goes up to 68%. So you
Wow.
have a way of increasing the chances that her baby will survive. And this is life-changing. This is giving her a second chance at choice, okay? We talk about choice. The mom changes her mind, she should have another chance at choice. And her choice is to try to save her baby. So we know that this works. We know it works in animal studies. There's been an outstandingly good study in rats looking at Mifepristone and giving progesterone, sort of mimicking what we do in abortion pill reversal. Helps the rats too. The babies who get Mifepristone abort. The babies who get progesterone after the Mifepristone, they don't. And it's really encouraging that we have such a simple, beautiful, elegant solution that has been safety tested for 60 years that can give women a second chance. We all need a second chance sometimes.
No, it really is incredible, and I wanted to clarify for the listeners that the 4,000 plus babies that have been saved are babies who had mothers who took the first drug, the chemical abortion pill, and then were able to be saved by taking progesterone after the fact. There are countless women who have taken progesterone to help them in their natural pregnancies. I'm one of them. I took
Right.
progesterone mostly throughout my pregnancy because I wanted to make sure that my progesterone levels were high enough to maintain the pregnancy. Thank God, and we have a healthy son. But progesterone is very important, and as Dr. Harrison said, women use it to increase their progesterone levels when they're pregnant. It can also be used to save the baby if a woman changes her mind after she takes the first pill of chemical abortion pill, which is the Mifepristone. But even though you mentioned that pro-abortion endocrinologist who said I would give progesterone to my daughter, does the mainstream medical community accept the fact that progesterone has these effects on the chemical abortion pill, or what has been their reaction to its use?
It's very interesting. So if you look on the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, they'll say, oh, no evidence, nothing to see here, okay? But at the same time, they acknowledge that if you take a progesterone-like compound, like Depo-Provera, at the same time that you take Mifeprex, there's an increase in ongoing pregnancies. What a thought. And so they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. The studies show that even the progesterone-like compounds, even though they don't work as well as natural progesterone, they still increase the chances of survival after Mifepristone. So you can't get around it. It's common sense for anybody that knows how to treat a poisoning to use this drug, to use natural progesterone to outcompete Mifeprex at the progesterone receptor.
It's amazing. And there is, if you just type in abortion pill reversal, you will find information about how to find, especially if you or someone you know is in a situation where she changes her mind, doesn't want to go through with the chemical abortion. There is a possibility that that baby can still be saved. And so
Yeah.
please pass that information on to anyone who you come across, or if you're in that position yourself, just know that there is a chance that you can still save your baby. I wanted to talk a little bit about the environmental impact of chemical abortion. Recently, we've just learned so much about the environmental impact of hormonal contraception in the wastewater systems. But you were
Right.
talking about how obviously a woman is left to handle, deal with the abortion itself the privacy of her own home, in the toilet, etc. So how is that affecting our wastewater from the actual drug itself? And also, obviously, there could be potentially fetal remains in the wastewater as well.
So I'm not an expert on waste disposal, but what I can tell you is biologically, what happens to mifepristone when you take it in your mouth? It goes into your bloodstream, and then some is filtered out in your feces and some is filtered out in your urine. So the drug itself can be filtered out, but also when the drug breaks down in your body, what it breaks down into is called the metabolites. Those metabolites are also block progesterone. So it's the drug itself and the metabolites that get filtered out. When it gets filtered out in your urine, it goes into the wastewater. Just like the problem with hormonal contraception, not all wastewater systems look for or filter out these kind of steroid hormone or steroid hormone blockers. So there is the potential that this is going into wastewater. And if you care at all about the environment, these drugs are not only cause abortions in humans, they cause abortions in any mammal. That's why the drug development literature used rats, rabbits, mice. I don't think it was used in monkeys, but any animal that makes a placenta, that is all mammals, use progesterone as part of the way that they can carry a baby. That's just basic biology. So when you block that, then they abort. You've got mifepristone, which blocks progesterone, and you've got the metabolites of mifepristone, which also block progesterone, which are being urinated out and do go into the wastewater. No one's looking, and they should. They should look because this has the potential for affecting mammals wherever the wastewater is. If that wastewater hasn't got the capacity, if the treatment facility doesn't have the capacity to filter out those particular chemicals. And like you said, the analogy is we already know that birth control pills, the metabolites are affecting wildlife. So it's the same issue.
And I would add to that that it's not just the wildlife. If the wastewater facilities aren't able to filter it out of our drinking water, that still becomes our drinking water. So it goes back to everybody. And if those hormones from the hormonal contraception and also the mifepristone, etc., in the water is not filtered out, who knows how that's affecting us as humans who end up drinking water that's been filtered, but maybe doesn't hasn't been filtered completely of these things.
Yeah. And a lot of it will depend on your particular system, where you live and what your wastewater system's capable of doing and not
Yeah.
capable of doing.
And we need more data on what's in our water and where it's coming from, right?
Yeah, well, that like I said, I'm not an expert on wastewater treatment, but I would sure like a little more information on where my water's coming from myself. But there's a whole separate issue of what does the mom do when she's miscarried her baby? That's a big thing. That's a piece of tissue. In medicine, whenever we take a biopsy or we take out a uterus or we take tissue, there is a proper way to dispose of medical waste to prevent other people from being infected, to prevent, problems in the wastewater. That's not happening with these, these processes, these uh, passing of the baby in the placenta. So you've
Mm.
got a significant possibility, especially if she's flushing the baby down, depending on how big the baby is. I mean, you can block pipes. There has been one report of a plumber who, you know, found a
Mhm.
baby blocking a pipe. It's gross, and I'm sorry to say this, but that's the reality. This is human beings who need to be disposed of in a way that doesn't put other human beings at risk, and that's not happening.
And I would even add to those who want to honor the babies that have passed. there are organizations that help you do a burial of
Yeah.
these babies, so that to give them the proper honor, the way that we would bury any family member. So there are resources out there for women and families who, even if they were wanting the abortion and they realize, what have I done? I can't believe they didn't tell me that this baby was so developed.
Yeah.
There are ways that she can honor her baby and even give the baby a proper burial.
Mhm.
So thank God for those organizations that offer those services, because it's a beautiful testament to life, that life is sacred,
Mhm.
even in the tragedy of abortion, when a woman goes that route, that her baby's body and the baby's life meant something, and that she can still honor her baby even after something as gruesome as an abortion. And hopefully that gives her some kind of closure as well in the process of healing from it. When you look at the chemical abortion, how it's presented publicly, Dr. Harrison, what do you think most people misunderstand?
Well, they misunderstand they're being lied to. It is not safe and effective. The only reason that mantra, the name that can't be named, well, this is the mantra that can't be challenged. The only reason for that is that to keep a drug on the market, it has to be safe and effective. So they say safe and effective, safe and effective. The fact is, it's a dangerous drug. And how effective it is in ending the baby's life may not be how effective it is in you passing the tissue. And the further along you are in pregnancy, the less effective it is. So people don't understand that. This is not pop a pill and the pregnancy's gone.
Mhm.
This is an arduous process of separating something that never meant to be separated at that gestational age. And so you've got consequences, and they're real: hemorrhage, infection, damage to the womb if you have to have emergency surgery. And these are real consequences. And that's why the informed consent issue is such a big deal. Women are not being told the truth. And that's malpractice. You can't start a procedure on somebody without telling them what's going to happen. That's just basic medicine. So I
And
think
it's also
that's what,
malpractice to abandon the women, right? To
yes,
say, take the drugs, and good luck. Go
yeah,
to the ER.
yes, it is. And that's what people don't understand. But they're starting
Mhm.
to. They're starting to see some cracks in this, you know, nothing to see here behind the curtain. There's a lot to see, and I think people are starting to wake up to that.
And hopefully, this episode will be shared with your friends and family. And again, it'll help inform people about what's really going on with these chemical abortion pills.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Harrison, you have testified before Congress and the FDA about these drugs. What changes would you like to see and how they're regulated or monitored?
Well, I think the drugs need to be off the market. I think these are drugs of abuse, and just like the opioids, there are some of them that were off the market. These drugs need to be off the market. The reason is because as long as they're available, people will abuse them, and they will be given to women without their consent, without even their knowledge. So I don't think there's any way to actually control them. Now, I'm not a politician, and obviously I'm not working in the FDA, but at the very minimum, there needs to be control over how these drugs are given. The woman needs informed consent, which means she needs an in-person ultrasound where, and if she decides to go through with this, where she is the one observed taking it. Before even any of that happens, she needs to be screened for coercion. There's no screening for coercion. There's no way to screen a woman for coercion by looking at a screen. You have no idea who is standing on the other side of my screen right now, maybe holding a gun to my head. You have no way to adequately screen for intimate partner violence and coercion, which has to happen. That should be a requirement before any abortion. And then
Absolutely.
she needs a waiting period so that she can think. She needs an alternative second opinion, like maybe at a pregnancy care center that can offer her other information. She needs an ultrasound to know how far along she is. She needs detailed information about what are my risks my risks at this gestational age because, you just pointed out, if a woman has things that complicate her personal medical history, those need to be known ahead of time. And she needs to be given the specific informed consent for her. That's not possible in a group setting, okay, where a lot of the abortion consent is done. You need one-on-one. If you want to say that this is a medical procedure, then you hold to medical accountability. The person who starts the procedure needs to be responsible for the completion of that procedure all the way to the end, not this dumping my complications on the ER. If all of those things were put in place, would I be in favor of abortion? No, because you're forgetting my second patient who's killed in the procedure. But I think those are a minimum for the mom. Those are a minimum. And the best thing is get the drug off the market. It's a horrible drug. There's no reason to use it for abortion.
Yes, thank you. That was so well said, Dr. Harrison. So, how has this rise in chemical abortion use, how is that changing the broader landscape of women's health care? We talked about the risks, we talk about the harms to women. Any other thoughts on how this is affecting it, both in the US and internationally?
Well, I think one thing we didn't talk about, we did talk about infection, bleeding, hemorrhage, dumping complications, talked about all those things and the lack of informed consent. I think another thing that is you have to understand is that how safe or dangerous these drugs are depend on what resources the woman has, what healthcare resources. So these drugs are being pushed in places to give access to abortion in places where women don't have access to an ER. They don't have an ER that has blood. They don't have facilities to handle infectious complications. They don't have anesthesia or anything to do an emergency surgery. What happens to the woman who has a hemorrhage from a 14-week abortion who can't access ER care? You know what happens? She dies. She dies.
Wow.
Okay. And that's the problem. The problem is when you talk about pushing these drugs in areas that have a lack of access for healthcare infrastructure, you're talking increasing the risk of death for that woman.
Wow. And you also spoke at the UN on this. So I'm guessing a lot of the conversations was around this and maternal mortality. Obviously, in other parts of the world, as you mentioned, medicine and hospital availability, et cetera, is not as easily achieved. So it's hard for women to find the care they need. What other things have you presented to the United Nations concerning women's health?
I was with a consortium of people looking at maternal mortality, and we know what decreases maternal mortality. Skilled birth attendants, adequate healthcare facilities, um, the transportation, actually, infrastructure makes a big difference. Clean water and women's education. Okay. So all of those things are known to decrease maternal mortality. And we also know that in a state like Chile, which has excellent records, in Chile, abortion was legal and the maternal mortality was starting to decrease because of antibiotics. And then in 89, I believe it was, abortion was made illegal. And everybody thought, oh my goodness, maternal mortality is going to skyrocket because abortion is illegal. You know what happened? Maternal mortality fell and abortion-related mortality fell because there were less abortions. So
Wow.
the lie that somehow abortion's needed to decrease maternal mortality, it's a lie. Look at the evidence. We have countries that have natural experiments in this, that have published their data. What you need for women to decrease maternal mortality is you need the ability to get to a hospital that's staffed and that can take care of the problems so that the women don't die. That's what you need. You don't need abortion drugs being pushed on women who can't control the hemorrhage that happens afterward. That increases maternal mortality.
Well, thank you for speaking so much truth, even in the international sphere, and standing up for women who are vulnerable for other reasons that women in the U.S. are vulnerable, and
Yeah.
women in situations that are in developing countries don't have access to the right medicine, hospitals, even clean water, et cetera, causing so many issues. So thank you for really championing women and children. I have a couple more questions for you, Dr. Harrison, and this is more looking into the future here. So looking ahead, what hope do you see there's a change in medicine, policy, or culture when it comes to how we treat women with unplanned pregnancies?
That's a great question. Boy, I think I think as we're starting to take a look at trauma-informed care in medicine and starting to understand the trauma that happens with abortion, that I think people will start to see, hey, I don't want my son or daughter or wife to go through this kind of trauma and live with it the rest of their life. Let's work this out. Let's find better solutions. And I think that as people understand the risks involved with chemical abortion, and as they understand the incredible way in which we're formed, what a miracle. Every single human being is a miracle. As that understanding and appreciation becomes more commonplace, people will be less wanting to snuff out that miracle and see that it's just not a solution. So I think there is a change in the way the upcoming generation views life. This is a generation that has their ultrasound pictures in their journals, of themselves. They get it. I was there, I'm here now. So this is a generation that's not going to be as easy to pull the wool over their eyes. It's just not going to be as easy to lie to them. And that gives me a lot of hope that when you seek the truth, the truth becomes kind of self-evident and it argues for human flourishing. It doesn't argue for the destruction of human beings.
Beautifully said. Now, in terms of you said that you love research and your role changed to director of research for AAPLOG. What is the research that you're working on right now?
So what we do at APLOG is we have compiled under our resources tab. So go to our website, resources, you'll see committee opinions and practice guidelines. Those are a compilation of what exists in the peer-reviewed literature, as well as expert opinions from pro-life doctors across the country on different topics. So we have one on abortion pill reversal, and we have a new update coming out. So in the next, probably by 2027, you'll see a new update on abortion pill reversal. We have fetal pain topics that we do with American College of Pediatricians. We have all kinds of topics that are helpful, and we spend enormous amounts of hours looking through the peer-reviewed literature so that these documents can give the practicing OB-GYN or anybody who cares a compilation of what does the literature really say. And that's really valuable if you're trying to defend life or even explain to your patients. So that's what I'm excited about doing, and will continue to do that as long as I'm capable of doing it.
And we will certainly link to all of those resources that APLOG provides to the public. And you'll also be able to find them on bioethicsbabe.com. Then finally, Dr. Harrison, what keeps you motivated to continue speaking out on this issue after all these years?
Well, I have daughters and I have granddaughters, and I'm a woman and I have friends, and I've seen the consequences of this issue in their lives, and have family members who this issue has touched, and I want to help. Uh, and I think that truth empowers people. Empowers people. And I want to be part of sharing that truth with my sisters.
Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, for sharing this with the world, testifying, and all your writings and all of your leadership. We are so appreciative of your time and all of your knowledge. So thank you, Dr. Harrison, for joining us on the show.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Serena, for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Bioethics Babe podcast. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platform, and share with your friends and family. Also check out bioethicsbabe.com for the latest episodes and resources.